Dylan Hernandez, LA Times. Great to see you. As long as Japan keeps cranking out and posting these star Japanese players, I will keep calling you. So please don't ever change your phone number.
I'll try not to. Well, we'll see. It's a company-paid cell phone, and who knows how much longer we're going to be in business. I probably shouldn't say that, but
I get it. Trust me.
Yeah.
It's great to see you. I know baseball free agency is essentially underway, but the hot name this year, as was a couple of years ago. I mean, last year was Yamamoto, but this is different. Roki Sasaki. Tell us what's special about this kid and why every single team in baseball is after him.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's the cost, right? He's 23 years old, and because he is under the age of 25, he's coming over. He's going to be classified as an amateur player, which to me kind of seems ridiculous. This guy is a professional, like in the second best league in the world, but he's going to be basically paid as an amateur. So first year, he's going to be a minimum salary player. 2 more years where his salary the team can just throw out a number. Hey, we're going to pay you $600,000. That'll be his salary. And then 3 more years where he's under club control under the arbitration system, right? So you're basically going to you're looking at a, top 20, maybe even a top 10 pitcher in baseball that you're going to be getting like at a minimum salary. So there's no downside to this, right? If you go out and, I know Juan Soto is kind of the number 1 free agent on the market, so to speak. But, he's going to cost $500-600 million. You sign Juan Soto and Juan Soto gets hurt, you're going to turn into the Angels, right? Where you got all this money bundled up in Mike Trout and Rendon, and they're not playing, and it really can sink your team. This kid, because he costs nothing, there's no downside, right? Imagine the worst player that the Padres had on their roster this year. That's how much money this kid's going to make, right? And he's going to potentially be a superstar. So you want him, and I think also he kind of fits this new, I would say, mold of Japanese player. Probably the third guy that I can think of, Yu Darvish being the first, Ohtani being the second, Roki Sasaki now the third, where these are not like your kind of stereotypical Japanese players, right? Yamamoto kind of looks like the traditional Japanese player. Yamamoto is like barely taller than me, These guys, right? Darvish, Ohtani, now Sasaki, these guys are like physically big guys, right? They're very athletic, and because of that, right, and because kind of they have like the physical strength to kind of go along with all the skill and the practice that they've accumulated over time, these are the type of kids that they've been going to high school in the United States. They might have gone 1-1 in the draft, right? They're that type of physical specimens kind of combined with the talent. And, probably, I saw actually Sasaki pitch when he was in high school, right? I talked to people I remember at that time. Right. And the consensus was that he was ahead of Ohtani as a pitcher, And this guy throws an easy 100. The velocity was down a little bit this year. He was hurt at some point, but it's kind of been traditionally like an easy 100, easy delivery. I think with a lot of bigger pitchers, and Ohtani's actually a pretty good example of this, right? Where actually in Japan, when he was coming out of high school, they thought, okay, this guy's like probably a hitter first, pitcher second, just because even though he had the velocity, right, he was having trouble kind of repeating that delivery. This kid has a very smooth delivery, even though he's got a very high leg kick, but it's still repeatable. And that kind of shows like his athleticism. The game that I went to go watch, it was like over there at kind of the national high school tournament. It starts at the very local level, right? And he's kind of from the middle of nowhere, not too far actually from where Ohtani's from, kind of in the northern rural part of Japan. And I do remember it was kind of funny was they played this like very small, this team from like this very small village. 7 of the 9 starters on that team, I believe, were named Yamada, right? And these guys are all like my size, So you have Sasaki there, and like he's just kind of throwing an easy like 92, 93, just blowing everybody away. But what I do remember is him hitting a double. He was obviously their cleanup hitter. This is high school. And you can see by the way he ran, this guy is very, very athletic, So I think that's kind of more like the exciting part here, right? Is that you have kind of a Japanese pitcher who's going to do a lot of Japanese things, right? In terms of like his command's going to be good. He's going to be able to throw multiple pitches. He probably is going to, for our liking, nibble a little too much. All those stereotypes probably will fit. That said, he's got, again, the physical projectability of a Darvish, of an Ohtani. And so you do think that this is a guy, if somebody's going to kind of break through and become like a real superstar, right? That this is a guy that can do that.
Wow, Dylan, that was a Bill Walton-esque answer. That was fantastic. Great stuff. I appreciate that. Now, depending on who you read on what day, whether it's the Athletic or the LA Times or anybody else or ESPN, there is consensus that he's either destined for the Dodgers the way that Shohei Ohtani apparently was before he went on his tour, or there's a feeling that, you know what, the Dodgers will be the last place that he would go. What's the sense that you get? I'm not sure how much we know about this kid, about his personality. Does he want to go ahead and be under the shadow of Ohtani, Yamamoto, in Los Angeles, or does he want to go somewhere else, become his own guy, like, San Diego, and reunite with Yu Darvish? What's your sense?
Yeah, so that to me is the big question here, right? My sense is that, right, just kind of having covered Japanese players for a while, he probably has a pretty good idea of what he wants to do.
Okay.
I remember a couple of years ago when Senga got posted. Somebody had told me, he's a big Mets fan, right? He's a big fan of like the Syndergaard, DeGrom Mets, and he kind of ended up there, right? Yamamoto last year when he got posted, somebody had told me at the very beginning, it's 75-25 Dodgers or Yankees, right? And kind of it played out the way. Because I do think that, the money is a factor, don't get me wrong, but money is not the driving factor over there.
Not right now, especially, right.
Yeah, and I think, right, because these guys are all millionaires back home, and it's more about like kind of chasing your dream, right? The money's almost kind of considered gross to some degree over there, right? You make too much, it kind of feels weird, just kind of given their values and stuff. So I think really this is about like him, what does he want out of his career? Now, this is the part that we don't know. This is the question, and I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that, and I don't want to make kind of what we do here, sound negative necessarily, but they don't really like commercialize their trauma, right? I do think, if you've been, and part of it too is just, I guess, how, athletes kind of connect with fans in different ways in different places. But, right, in the United States, let's just say something really, you have a lot of tragedy in your background. Probably one of the first things you do actually is go to the media, talk about this, get this out there as a means, of getting the fans to get to know you. You get them on your side. Over there, people, tough, right? Traumatic things are very personal. They're considered personal. And so, there has been a distance between him and the Japanese media to a degree because he lost his father in that tsunami in 2011, right? His father, I believe, was a firefighter, got swept away there. He lost a set of grandparents.
Yeah.
And, you do hear about just kind of kids that grew up in that region, right? He's right from the coast there, where kids don't smile as much and stuff, right? There's just kind of, you can still tell even all these years later. And so the Japanese media has, while, compared to us, right, they keep a bit of distance anyway, but even more so with him, and now there has been some weird things, where every year, they make him pitch on the anniversary of the tsunami, when he was pitching for Lotte, right, they would have an exhibition, usually be spring training. And so they would have him pitch an exhibition game there in the WBC. His start in the first round, coincidentally or not, happened to fall on the anniversary of the tsunami. And actually because of that, he was very much he's become kind of this symbol of like the recovery of that region, right?
Japanese resilience.
Yes, and he became very kind of popular for a while there. And actually so because of that, the ratings for his first start were actually higher than Ohtani's first round start. Yeah, and now, so my point is, I guess we don't really know him. When Ohtani came to the United States, he had a press conference, right? This is before when he first got posted. And he was coming here to like basically meet with teams, and he had a press conference in Tokyo, and he said, my intention is to become the best player in the world. That's why I'm going to the United States. He said this out, and I don't think we really ever questioned that, right? And I think even him picking the Angels, I know people now are kind of like, well, like, why would he pick such like a loser organization, this and that? But you know what? He wanted to be like a two-way player, right? And he had to go to a team that was going to give him the room, right, to be a two-way player. Like, he signs with the Dodgers, he might not be hitting, right, or he might not be pitching. They would have, right, because they were a contending team that had to win now. They couldn't afford to just like let him do what he wanted. And so I really think that, in a way, like Ohtani really did kind of follow that. Now, Sasaki again has even a lower, I would say, even in Japan, I know Ohtani doesn't talk much now. He did talk pretty much every day when he was in Japan. So this kid, we really don't know too much just because he doesn't talk all too much. And now when the Marines posted that they were, announced that they were going to post him, they put out a statement on his behalf, and he did say, I'm going to go there to become the best player. I'm going to try to become the best player in the world. Now, again, this isn't a written statement. I haven't seen him say this, right? So it's kind of hard to judge like his sincerity about this, right? Does he think, because again, he's leaving early as far as they're concerned, right? They wait 2 more years. They get a percentage of his signing bonus. So they're also taking a financial hit. Does he feel he has to say that, hey, I'm going to try to be the best to justify himself leaving? Or is this something that really burns inside of him, right? Is this really something that he wants? And to me, that's really just the question here, right? If he's not really as determined as Ohtani is to be the best, sure, then go ahead, join him, right? Now, I do think, again, the way the Japanese kind of think, right? The star of the team is going to kind of get all the credit for everything. That becomes their legacy, right? And if Sasaki joins Ohtani, sure, he'll leave his name here and all that, but it'll still be viewed, I think, as kind of contributing more to like Ohtani's legacy than anything. So I do think that if he wants to if he's sincere about like, hey, like I want to be the man, right? I want to be the best. I want to be known as the best. Then I think he goes elsewhere. And, my guess is, again, by this point, he probably knows. It's just that because he's kept such a low public profile, I think it's really hard to guess where he's going to go. I just remember, again, when Ohtani was first coming from Japan, people knew him well enough, right, to say, this is what he's going to look for. Now, right, it didn't quite play out the way we thought it would, as Americans, right? Because our thing is, okay, well, you got to win kind of no matter what, right? Even people who say they're process oriented, I don't think are in our country relative to the way they are in Japan, right?
Right.
There the journey is almost more important than the actual result, right? Whereas here we prioritize kind of the result. And, I do think in retrospect, again, him choosing the Angels kind of made sense. And I think, right, these were kind of discussed as possibilities, that he might go to a place like this, he might go to a place like that. Because, I remember when I visited Ohtani's high school coach in 2017, I kind of made a flippant remark about, well, he's going to end up with the Dodgers or Yankees, right? And the guy tells me, I don't think so, right? Because keep in mind, Ohtani stayed at a local high school. And, the coach said, he came here because he wanted to create his own legacy. So I think he's going to go somewhere where he can create his own legacy, In regards to this kid, again, even the people around him are so quiet to the point where we don't get any of that kind of insight even into his personality. So it's kind of hard to speculate right now. But to me, it really kind of comes down to, does he mind kind of, right, playing second fiddle to Ohtani?
Right.
Or does he really want to be the guy?
Because if you want to beat the best, you have to go ahead and beat the best. And that would be Shohei Ohtani. And as long as he's a teammate, not a competitor of Ohtani, there's really no measuring stick as to how great he is. And same thing for Yamamoto.
Yeah.
How much do we know about the Yu Darvish relationship with Sasaki, and how possibly influential could that be? And you mentioned he suffered an unimaginable tragedy, of course, losing his entire family in that tsunami, or losing his father and the grandparents. And I'd imagine that Darvish has almost resembled a bit of a father figure to him, or in his life.
Yeah, I think Darvish just in general is just like a really nice guy, right? I'm sure you've gotten to get to know him. I think he's extremely sensitive to certain things. I remember even he asked me, when Freddie Freeman first showed up here, right? Freddie and I got off to a bit of a rocky start.
No.
Right? He cried in Atlanta, and
he kept crying.
And I just like obliterated him, right? And the next time I saw Darvish, I just remember, he was kind of asking me what that was about, and I was kind of explaining my viewpoint. And I just remember you just saying, he goes, I bet he just didn't want to get booed. Which is a very nice, right? He didn't want to get booed in Atlanta because he had kind of alienated the Braves fans. And I thought it was a very nice, simple, and I kind of like took a step back, and I'm like, yeah, he's probably right. But, anyway, he's a very kind of like insightful, very kind of kind person, right? I think more than, as athletes, I do think you have to be kind of self-absorbed to a certain degree, right? To become that good and perform at that level against other, competitive people. And Darvish has kind of managed to strike this really nice balance, I think, of being, very good on the field while kind of maintaining like a very high degree of humanity, And so from that standpoint, yeah, like I can't think of a guy, that you would rather play with, right? I mean, especially a guy kind of who's at the end of his career, who talks about like the responsibility he has to the next generation. I remember during the WBC, he was going on somebody's like, YouTube channel over there during the tournament. And I remember him saying at some point, I feel it is part of my duty to tell the world how great Ohtani is, you know? So this is a guy with like a sense of responsibility. And I think for sure, a guy like Sasaki comes in, again, a generational talent.
Yeah.
He's going to feel invested into like, hey, how can I make this guy, help this guy be as great as he can be, you know? And I think, you know, look, from the, and you know, it's funny, right? Because I tweeted something about this the other day and people on Twitter were, you know, oh, you hate the Dodgers, this and that. Look, I don't care. I get paid the same regardless of whether this guy goes. I'm just kind of taking a step back here. And I think it would be fantastic, right? I mean, that would be so. I mean, the Dodgers Padres thing is fantastic to begin with, right?
Yes.
Now, right. And to me, it is by far the best rivalry in baseball, right? It was. I mean, if I look back at that series, the only shame to me was that it was only a 5-game series. That would have been a great 7-game NLCS, right? You know, just with all of the stuff, and you add Sasaki to that thing to maybe kind of balance out the scales a little bit more. What could be more fun, you know? But yeah, so I think that San Diego makes a lot of sense. You know, they do think, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but like, right, there's some word going around in the scouting community that, well, he doesn't particularly like cold weather, you know, even though he grew up in a place where it snows like crazy.
Okay.
So I don't know, but I was told that like he doesn't particularly like cold weather. You know, so yeah, like I do think you kind of look at that, you know, they you know, Nomo's working for them, right? Takashi Saito's working for them.
Yep.
You know, right, AC Korogi's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has a lot of time in Japan.
I'm sure Asia Perlo's working on his Japanese presentation again, like he did to Ohtani from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, you know, now I do think what's kind of tough here, right, is the fact that I think usually these guys have an idea of where they want to go already, you know, and it doesn't really change. And, you know, you can talk about it, right? These guys have like Japanese management companies that might want to steer them here or there for like commercial reasons. But the reality is kind of these guys are going to end up where they're going to end up, right? Where they're kind of heart set. Mm-hmm. And again, to me, a lot of this is just like, well, what does this guy like want for his career, right? And
legacy.
You know, again, yeah, legacy. You know, and again, Padres haven't won yet, right? Right, they haven't won a World Series yet. I mean, that to me would be just like a huge kind of reason to go there if you really do kind of believe in yourself, right? Or
like a dream, like you don't want to. Like a dream team sort of thing, like a big three. Like, do you want to be part of that? I mean, I feel like he's always going to be in the shadow of Ohtani, no matter what he does. If he goes there, and it'll take years. And so,
yeah, absolutely. You know, and again, I think to, you know, and the effect of like comic book culture, even on athletes, I just think is just huge. You know, I think again, right? You know, you look at the playing both ways thing, right? That guy existed in Japan. It was just in a comic book. Right before Ohtani, right? Ohtani just kind of did that like in real life, but that idea existed, you know. You know, probably the most popular Japanese sports comic thing, right? It's about a soccer player who like never loses. And, you know, I think, you know, after the Dodgers won the World Series, Ohtani went to Friedman and said, let's do this 9 more times. You know, Friedman was kind of laughing at that, thinking the guy was joking. I think the guy's serious, right? Because again, that concept kind of exists, you know, and so again, you know, and in all these like baseball, you know, comic book things, right? It always comes down. The game's always right. It's that Trout Ohtani at bat, right? It always ends like that. That's what always kind of decides the game. And so again, I think that's the prism through which these kids, these players view the world, right? And they view their sport is like, hey, I want to be the guy. And again, it's how much does he want that, right? Because look, the easier path is to go to the Dodgers. Right, you know, you're going to be guaranteed a certain degree of success, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you don't perform, there are going to be other guys to kind of pick you up. It's not all on you, right? You're going to probably get a shot at winning this thing like right away from year one, you know, without you necessarily being like it, right? I mean, Yamamoto, who probably kind of was like underperformed his contract at least this year,
right? Until the postseason.
He's a World Series champion now, right? This year was a huge success in a way, even though he might have disappointed on an individual basis. This thing, you know, and after he beat the Padres in Game 5, now he's a civic hero, right? When they introduced the players in the NLCS, he went from being, you know, just a few days earlier from this guy who like, oh my God, we spent $300 million on this guy to like, I mean, he got a loud ovation. He's a hero now, right? And so I just think in some ways it's kind of safer to do the Dodgers thing, right?
That's the easy. That's the easy route. That's just too easy. I'm sorry.
Right,
You know,
right,
that's my
yeah.
perspective of it.
And again, right? Or does he have kind of that Ohtani thing where it's like, wait, what? He signed with the Angels?
Go to a loser first and help them.
Right. What are you doing? And I think the Padres are frankly like the Padres. Let's not pretend they're the Angels, right? I mean,
they're not.
They probably by the end of the season they had the best team in baseball.
Yes,
right.
Yes, they did. It's aggravating.
Right. And I do think, Musgrove doesn't get hurt.
Right.
Maybe even if it's a 7-game series, this whole thing plays out differently.
Completely changes everything.
Completely changes everything. So let's not sit here and pretend that this is some downtrodden team right now. But I think it kind of represents a happy medium because they don't have the history, right? And whoever is part of that first Padres team that wins the World Series, those guys, legacy forever. Now, again, I'm not sure, and it's going to be the Padres' job, I think, to kind of explain that to him.
I'm dying to, when it becomes time for the teams to go ahead and make their pitch and assemble their guys. I'm sure it's very slam dunk who the Dodgers are going to send. You're going to send Ohtani. You're going to send Yamamoto. If you're the Padres, you're going to send Yu Darvish. You're going to send Nomo and somebody else. I do wonder which group is more formidable presentation to Roki Sasaki. Dylan, I look forward to hopefully catching up with you again when that decision's made. But right now, as things stand, with what we don't know, which is a lot, what does your gut tell you about what makes sense for him?
Yeah, I guess
it's
impossible. If you had to put odds, you got to put it on the Dodgers, right?
Okay.
Because I do think, again, in terms of like competitiveness, ambition, Ohtani is really, a unicorn.
He's a superhero for Japan. He's a Japanese superhero.
In terms of even just kind of when they won the World Series, I just kind of wrote about like the courage that he has to dream. I was talking to somebody about this in the Dodgers organization, who's kind of gotten to know Ohtani a bit over the years. And he was saying, even most high-end talent players, maybe especially high-end talent players, just wouldn't have the courage to be that bold, right? Because once you say, you know what, I want to be the best player ever, you've pretty much set yourself on a path to failure because only one guy can be that, right? And so to kind of to hold yourself to that standard, right? Or even just say, I want to be the best player in baseball and really mean it, right? You're going to probably fail, right? Mookie Betts is probably the hardest worker I have ever, right? I mean, in terms of like just the number of swings he takes, how much he's been working in the infield, this and that. And you know what? Like Ohtani's just better. He just is, right? And Mookie's like a top 5, top 3, maybe even the number 2 player in the game. And like there's somebody just going to kind of come along. And if you hold yourself to that standard, I do think it becomes very difficult, right? And so again, is it, again, to me, it's a question of does Sasaki kind of have that same drive that Ohtani does? And maybe he does, right? But it's just the fact that, like, I just think the number of people like that are so few in the world, right? You're talking about guys and people that are, not just the best, but also kind of like even like transcend their sport, right? The people that have that type of ambition, those are the types of people you're talking about, and right now I'm just kind of trying to think right now, right? I mean, is there even a guy like that in global soccer right now? Probably not. Right now that Messi and Ronaldo are kind of out of the picture. I mean, maybe Verstappen in Formula One seems kind of like, right? He seems like he's pretty crazy in that way, but we're really talking about just really a handful of human beings here. And so if you ask me, does he have the same, drive as Ohtani? I just think you have to bet against it just because the probability of,
because he's one of one.
Correct. Now it could be right that you do have 2 people like that coming out of the same prefecture in rural Japan. That's possible. Maybe because Ohtani came before him, right? And there are, by the way, some connections there. I did hear when Sasaki was like a high school senior, his coach at some point went to go talk to Ohtani's coach in terms of like, how do we deal with this, right? How should we handle this stuff? And so even though right, and Ohtani's alma mater actually knocked Sasaki out of the national tournament, right? The prefecture stage, they knocked him out of that tournament. But even while they compete, there is a fraternity there. There is a baseball community there. I do think they all kind of pull for each other, right? So maybe it could very well be that, like, hey, you know what? He saw Ohtani do this, and hey, maybe I can do it too, And I mean, sure, we have seen him do some extraordinary things. Last year. He threw a perfect game. Came back in his next start, threw 8 perfect innings, and the managers just decided to pull him. I mean, we were 1 inning away from back-to-back perfect games. He certainly has the talent to, that I think would justify having ambitions like that, right? Because I mean, I do think you look at him and he should be, right? If you have that type of talent, that's the kind of guy you want him to think that he could be the best pitcher in the world. So, go ahead.
Oh no, okay. I'm sorry. Last thing, because you mentioned the rivalry of the Padres Dodgers, best in baseball, and it is. And I think what happened in the postseason took it to a new level.
Yeah.
The Manny Machado thing with Dave Roberts. How much? I mean, that seemed so blown. That was so blown out of proportion. But I guess it worked. Did Dave Roberts really need to fire up his team by just coming up with some Manny Machado tried to assault me in the dugout sort of thing?
I don't know if it was necessary, right? But it kind of, I think it was. You know what that kind of reminded me a little bit of a low-key version of that was there was a huge brawl one time between the Dodgers and Diamondbacks going back about 10 years, right? Had this big rivalry. This is when Kirk Gibson was managing the Diamondbacks. And it even got to the point where I remember Clayton Kershaw and Ian Kennedy were throwing at guys in a spring training game, right? Like that's how bad it got. But there was this huge brawl at Dodger Stadium. And I just remember the first guy out of the dugout was Don Mattingly. And Don Mattingly, I think, grabbed Alan Trammell, like threw him like a rag doll.
Wow. And
at that point, it's kind of like, dude, this guy's one of ours, right? Like he's one of ours, And I do think that Dave, he became more one of I do think that over the course of this postseason, especially, he became more one of them, right? I mean, because this is such a lot of like the atmosphere here is very impersonal just because, on the one hand, they talk about one of the strengths of the Dodgers, they use all 40 guys, right? On the other hand, they are using all 40 guys. So guys are coming in and out and right. Everything's kind of changing. And, as a manager, Roberts' job is to kind of overlook everything. And, while as much as he tries to connect with like the key guys, at least on a daily basis, there's part of his job, obviously, just administering stuff, and I do think that like kind of him interjecting himself into this thing, while it might have been unnecessary, and probably from a San Diego standpoint, kind of annoying, right? Because he said later himself that he kind of did it to kind of disband the flame, so to speak, right? I mean, he admitted this in public. So, but I don't know if it was necessary, but I kind of think it makes it good. I mean, the fact that we're talking about it.
I know, it's insane.
Right?
He's Dave Roberts. He's a San Diegan. He lives here. He's now like the most hated guy in all of sports, and next to Dean Spanos.
There was so much good stuff. I mean, I love the Profar.
Oh, so good.
When he robbed, Betts of that home run, and the way Dodger Stadium reacts to Manny Machado, I think is great. I mean, I think this is really fun. I really think that this is fun, and there's just kind of, especially on the Padres side, there's just so much kind of personality, and so I hope Profar stays there.
So do I. So do I. I'm sure the Padres fans do, and that'll be a little fun thing in left field. And if Sasaki decides to call you one day and ask your advice as to where he goes, I hope you tell him San Diego, because you need that extra dynamic for the rivalry, right?
Yeah, well, that's what's good. That is what's good. I do think that is like what's good for the game, right? I mean, look, both outcomes. I mean, to be right, fair. I do think both will probably benefit, right? I mean, baseball hasn't had a real dynasty since like that late 90s Yankees thing. And I don't think that's bad for the game, right? To have kind of an identifiable team, and, the fact that right. I mean, we've already seen overnight how much guys' lives have changed, right? I do think, him joining the Dodgers, there being a dynasty, will have some benefits, right? I kind of enjoy, right, because you and I, we cover so many games, right? Yeah. We cover so many games. I have seen, as much as people say, like, hey, you see something new at the ballpark every day, it's not true. Most days suck, But that said, what you do remember, though, right, are when teams, like, genuinely don't, when it's not fake. Right?
Yes.
Right now, Dodgers-Giants is not a real thing.
No, because the Giants are lifeless.
Right. That's entirely fan-driven right now.
Yeah.
This Dodgers-Padres thing, this is, like, real. The players... I mean, I know we saw Mookie and, Tatis sitting on a couch doing his podcast.
Right, of course.
Right? And there is respect, obviously, between the top guys. But there is, like, a real, like, I want to beat those guys. Yeah. I want to beat them because they're them, right? And, they're going to sit there and flip their bats. And the way Ohtani flipped his bat, after that first home run in game one, I mean, all of that stuff is going to kind of add up. I just think it's a tremendous rivalry, and anything to kind of enhance that to me, those are the games that I think we're going to remember, and the fans are going to remember for years.
That was great. Dylan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this story continuing. I will be hitting you up regardless of where he ends up in the next, 2 months? 1 month? 1 month.
Yeah, it could be
Month and a half
2
or so.
months. It could be a month. It could be 2. It could be 3. I mean, you can wait until the start of spring training if you want.
And someone's going to write at the end that all along, this is where he was going to go.
Right.
But we're still going to wait this out.
Yeah. Well, it's, I do think that this is kind of interesting though, right? Because I think January 15th is the cutoff for the international signing period. And so, if he signs before January 15th, it's going to be, okay, whatever money they have left in their pool, right? And the fact that this hasn't happened yet, it kind of tells me maybe they're waiting until January 15th to kind of reset it, right? In which case, maybe he's looking at a team that's, almost tapped out internationally, like the Padres are. So the fact,
they'll get creative.
I think the longer this lasts, right? Because the Dodgers, I think, have like $2.5 million, which is pretty much as anybody has right now. And granted, he could get more from the Dodgers if he waits until January 15th, whatever. But I just think it puts more teams in play the longer he lasts, right? Which, so if I'm the Dodgers, I'd be probably every day that passes without him getting posted, I'd probably get a little more nervous.